My dad became a monster. I woke up to the sound of my mom coughing. It was a rough, hacking cough that sounded like she was trying to clear something thick and nasty from her lungs. This wasn't the gentle cough she had when she had a cold, it sounded much worse. I knew that sound. It was the sound of pneumonia, a sickness that had landed her in the hospital just before I was born. "Mom," I called out softly from my bed. My room was pretty dark, only lit by the faint glow of the streetlights filtering through the gaps in my blinds. It wasn't enough light to see clearly, but I could just make out the shape of my dad standing in the doorway. "Is Mom okay? Go back to sleep, Clay," my dad said, his voice hushed. "Your mom just has a little cold." A cold? No way. This was way worse than a cold. I sat up in my bed and pulled my favorite stuffed bear, Big Bear, close to my chest. Big Bear always made me feel safe, especially when I was scared. And right now, I was definitely scared. Mom being sick was scary enough. When she had pneumonia right before I was born, she was really, really sick. I didn't remember much about it, of course, being a baby and all, but I knew it was bad from the way my parents talked about it. They would tell the story with a nervous laugh, like they were trying to convince themselves that it wasn't as scary as it really was. But what scared me most wasn't just that my mom was sick. It was that my dad was acting weird. He never came into my room at night, not since I was little. Usually, he would tell me to go back to sleep from the doorway, which is where he was standing now. My mom was always the one who came in to comfort me when I was scared or had a bad dream. "Dad, why are you in my room?" I asked. My voice shook a little. "Just checking on you," he said. His voice sounded strange, strained and whispery, like he was trying not to make a sound. "Go back to sleep." Something was wrong. This wasn't my dad. I didn't know why or how, but it wasn't him. My chest tightened and my breath quickened. This wasn't a little kid scared, the kind you get when you watch a spooky movie. This was a deep, bone-chilling kind of fear that felt like an icy hand gripping my heart. I wanted to scream for my mom, but something held me back. I wasn't sure why, but I knew, deep down, that it wouldn't help. My dad, or whatever it was pretending to be my dad, stood there for a long moment. The only sound in the room was my mom's hacking cough in the distance and my own ragged breathing. I clutched Big Bear tighter, feeling his soft fur against my cheek. I closed my eyes tight, squeezing them shut, wishing desperately for the scary thing in my doorway to disappear. "Clay," my dad whispered. I could hear him taking a step towards my bed. I kept my eyes squeezed shut, not wanting to see what was coming next. "You need to be quiet. You need to go to sleep." I peeked one eye open and my breath caught in my throat. What I saw made my blood run cold. Standing by my bed wasn't my dad. It looked like him, kind of, but something was terribly wrong. His skin looked stretched tight over his bones, like an old, worn-out leather jacket. His eyes glowed an unnatural bright yellow in the darkness, burning like hot coals. And the worst part, the part that made my stomach churn with fear, was that he had a third eye, right in the middle of his forehead. This third eye was just a slit, like a cat's eye, and it pulsed with the same eerie yellow light. My body trembled and I wanted to scream again, but the fear was a choking fist around my throat, squeezing the sound away. I buried my face in Big Bear's fur, his familiar scent a small comfort in the face of the monstrous thing standing beside my bed. The monster that looked like my dad leaned down, its hot, fetid breath washing over me. It smelled like rotting meat and stale cigarettes, a smell that made me want to gag. "Go to sleep, Clay," it whispered, its voice raspy and hollow, like an echo in a tomb. "It will all be over soon." The thing that was pretending to be my dad placed its cold, clammy hand on my forehead, right between my eyes. The touch sent a jolt of pure terror through my body, a sharp, searing pain that made me cry out. That's the last thing I remember before blacking out. Underscore, 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 underscore. The next morning, I woke up feeling confused and disoriented. My head pounded like a drum and my body ached as if I had been run over by a truck. The events of the night before seemed blurry and unreal, like a bad dream that fades quickly upon waking. I wondered if maybe I had imagined it all. Maybe I had a fever, I thought, and the fever had caused me to hallucinate. My mom was sick after all. It wasn't out of the realm of possibility that I caught what she had. I got out of bed, grabbed Big Bear, and went to check on my mom. I found her downstairs, sitting at the kitchen table, sipping tea. She looked pale and tired but better than the night before. "Morning, sleepyhead," she said, her voice raspy but not as bad as it had been the previous night. "You slept in late, you must be feeling better." "I am," I said, even though I didn't quite believe it. My head still pounded, and a deep, unsettling fear lingered in my gut. It felt like a warning, a premonition of something terrible lurking just out of sight. But I pushed the fear down. I didn't want to worry Mom. She was already sick, and I didn't want to make things worse. And a tiny part of me, a hopeful part, believed that maybe it had all been a bad dream. My dad was at the stove, making pancakes. He turned and smiled when he saw me. "Good morning, champ," he said. He looked normal, like his usual self, not the terrifying monster from the night before. It was all very confusing. I decided, for my own sanity, it was best not to mention what I had seen. It would sound crazy. I didn't even fully believe it myself. The pancakes were delicious, but I couldn't quite shake the lingering unease. The image of the monster dad with glowing yellow eyes kept flashing through my mind. I tried to focus on something else, on anything else, but the image was persistent. It felt like a splinter in my brain, a tiny piece of something sharp and painful that I couldn't remove. After breakfast, I went to my room to play with my Legos. I tried to focus on building a spaceship, but the unsettling fear gnawed at the edges of my thoughts. I kept glancing at the window, half expecting to see the monster dad's yellow eyes peering in. I wondered if maybe I had been sleepwalking and somehow dreamt the whole thing up. Sleepwalking was something I was prone to, a fact that both terrified and embarrassed me. I tried to shrug off the unease, but it refused to budge. It was like a dark cloud following me, raining down a constant drizzle of anxiety and dread. I felt utterly alone. Later that afternoon, my mom started coughing again. It wasn't as bad as the night before, but it was still a rough, hacking cough that sounded painful. My dad went to the store to pick up some cough syrup, leaving me alone with Mom. She was lying on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, trying to rest. Her cough was getting worse, I could tell. It rattled in her chest and made her wince in pain. "Are you okay, Mom?" I asked, sitting beside her on the couch. She smiled weakly. "I'm fine, honey," she said, her voice a strained whisper. "Just a little cold." I didn't believe her. She had said the same thing the previous night, and I knew this was much worse than a cold. But I didn't say anything. I knew it wouldn't help. It just made me feel helpless. My mom closed her eyes, trying to sleep. I sat quietly beside her, watching over her. I wanted to tell her about what had happened the previous night, but the words caught in my throat. The memory was so vivid, so terrifying, that I wasn't sure if I could even express it out loud. What if she thought I was crazy? What if she didn't believe me? I was already terrified, and the idea of my mom thinking I was crazy was unbearable. But more than that, a small part of me, a deeply buried part, knew that telling her wouldn't change anything. Whatever had happened the previous night, whatever had been in my room, it was something beyond our understanding. Something that words couldn't explain or banish. A heavy, oppressive silence settled over the living room. The only sound was my mom's strained breaths and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. The house, which usually felt warm and comforting, now felt cold and hostile, like something dark and dangerous had infiltrated our safe space. My mind raced with questions that had no answers. What was that thing in my room? Why did it look like my dad? What did it want? But the biggest question, the one that gnawed at my mind with the insistence of a hungry wolf, was, what had it done to me? Why did I feel so strange, so detached? It was like a part of me was missing, replaced with a hollow, echoing emptiness. I felt adrift, unmoored, like a boat with a broken rudder tossed about in a stormy sea. I didn't know who I was anymore, or what I was becoming. And that realization was the most terrifying thing of all. I longed for the comfort and security of my parents, but a cold certainty told me that they couldn't help me. They were as helpless as I was in the face of this unseen, unknown threat. I was utterly alone. Underscore, 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 underscore. That night, I lay in bed, listening to my mom's labored breaths from the next room. The sound of her illness, so familiar and yet so strange, filled the house. It snaked under my bedroom door, a sinister lullaby. My dad had given Mom some cough medicine, but it didn't seem to be helping. If anything, her cough was getting worse. I felt a creeping dread, a sickening feeling in the pit of my stomach that told me something terrible was about to happen. I hugged Big Bear close, his softness a small comfort in the cold, dark room. Sleep seemed impossible. I lay there for what felt like hours, my eyes wide open, staring at the shadows that danced across the walls, every creak of the house sending a shiver of fear down my spine. I waited, holding my breath, for the monster dad to return. But he didn't, not that night, or the night after, or the night after that. But that didn't make the fear go away. In fact, the fear intensified. It was like a poison slowly spreading through my veins, twisting my thoughts, warping my reality. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye, shadowy figures that flitted just beyond my vision. I heard voices whispering my name in the dead of night, beckoning me from the shadows. My mom got worse. The pneumonia settled deep in her lungs, making it difficult for her to breathe. My dad called the doctor, and after a brief examination, the doctor decided Mom needed to go to the hospital. I stood in the driveway, watching as the ambulance pulled away, its flashing lights painting the night sky in harsh reds and blues. My dad, his face etched with worry, placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Don't worry, Clay," he said. "Your mom is going to be okay. They're going to take good care of her at the hospital." I wanted to believe him. I desperately wanted to believe him. But the gnawing fear in my gut told me otherwise. While Mom was at the hospital, my dad tried his best to keep things normal. He made my favorite meals, played board games with me, and tucked me in each night, assuring me that Mom would be home soon. But behind his forced cheer, I could see the fear and worry etched in his eyes. He wasn't sleeping well, I could tell. He was pacing the house at night, talking in hushed tones on the phone with Mom's doctors. And something else was happening to my dad, something subtle but undeniable. It was the same thing that had happened to me. A shift, a change, a subtle warping of reality. He was still my dad, but different. It was as if a dark shadow had fallen over him, slowly eclipsing the man I knew. The yellow in his eyes was becoming more pronounced, I noticed. Not the white part, the colored part in the center. It was as though someone had taken a yellow crayon and started coloring in his iris. It happened so slowly that if you weren't really paying attention, you would never notice. He was blinking a lot, too. Not just normal blinking, but a rapid fluttering of his eyelids, like a bird trying to take flight. And sometimes, when he looked at me, it was with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. A piercing, unsettling stare that seemed to bore into my soul. It reminded me of the way the monster dad had looked at me in the moments before everything went black. The longer Mom was in the hospital, the more my dad changed. The yellow in his eyes intensified, the rapid blinking became more frequent, and the piercing stares lingered longer, sending chills down my spine. He was starting to move differently, too. His movements were jerky, almost mechanical, as if something had disrupted the natural flow of his body. And then there was the new habit. Every night, after he thought I was asleep, he would stand outside my bedroom door, watching me. I could sense his presence, a heavy weight in the darkness. I would pretend to be asleep, my heart hammering in my chest, but I knew he was there. Watching me, waiting for something. One night, I worked up the courage to confront him. I sat up in bed and called out his name. He didn't answer, but I could feel his presence retreating into the darkness. A few seconds later, I heard his footsteps, slow and measured, walking away down the hallway. He never spoke to me about it, and I never mentioned it to him. But from that night on, I knew, with a chilling certainty, that the monster dad, the thing that had haunted my nightmares, was no longer confined to the shadows. It had taken root in my world, in my house, in my family. And there was nothing I could do to stop it. I spent most of my days trying to pretend everything was normal. I went to school, did my homework, played with my friends, all the while pretending that the world hadn't tilted on its axis, that a dark, sinister force hadn't infiltrated my life. But it was a charade, a fragile mask I wore to protect myself from the crushing weight of fear and uncertainty. At night, though, the fear returned full force. I lay in bed, unable to sleep, listening to the sounds of my dad pacing the house, his movements becoming increasingly erratic and unsettling. The soft glow of the streetlights filtering through my blinds cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, shadows that seemed to writhe and pulsate with a life of their own. I kept Big Bear close, his soft fur a small comfort in the face of the growing darkness. But even Big Bear couldn't completely chase away the fear. I knew, deep down, that something terrible was going to happen. I couldn't say why or how, but I knew. It was a heavy weight in my chest, a growing dread that shadowed my every thought. The world around me felt fragile, ready to shatter at the slightest touch. And I was trapped in the middle, caught in the web of a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. underscore, 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 underscore. Mom came home from the hospital a few weeks later. She was still weak, her body ravaged by the pneumonia, but she was home. That brought a sliver of hope, a flicker of light in the ever-growing darkness. But her return didn't dispel the unease. The fear that had taken root in our home had sunk its claws deep, twisting and warping our reality. Mom, like me, seemed to sense that something was terribly wrong. She didn't talk about it, but I saw it in her eyes, in the worried glances she exchanged with my dad, in the way she would flinch at his sudden, jerky movements. She, too, was trapped in this nightmare. My dad's transformation was almost complete. The yellow in his eyes burned bright, his movements were a disjointed dance of twitches and jerks, and his once warm smile was now a grotesque parody, a cruel mockery of the man he had once been. He barely slept anymore, spending most of his nights pacing the house like a caged animal, his whispers echoing in the darkness. And the stares. Those piercing, unsettling stares that sent chills down my spine. They were constant now, a constant reminder of the monster lurking beneath his skin. He stared at my mom with a mixture of hunger and desperation, his eyes burning with an unnatural intensity. And he stared at me with an unsettling blend of affection and something else, something dark and unknowable. It felt like he was trying to show me something, to share a secret that words couldn't express. It was both terrifying and strangely compelling, like watching a train wreck unfold in slow motion. You know you should look away, but the horror is so mesmerizing that you can't tear your eyes from the unfolding disaster. One night, after tucking me into bed, my dad lingered in my doorway, his shadow looming large in the faint glow of my nightlight. He stood there silently for what felt like an eternity, his piercing stare burning into me. I clutched Big Bear tight, pretending to be asleep, but my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Finally, he spoke, his voice a hoarse whisper that sent chills down my spine. "You see it too, don't you?" he said. I didn't answer. I couldn't answer. My throat felt choked with fear, the words trapped behind a wall of dread. "It's happening," he continued, his voice barely audible. "We can't stop it." And then he left, his footsteps fading into the darkness, leaving me alone with the crushing weight of his words. I lay there for a long time, my mind reeling. My dad, the man who was supposed to protect me from the monsters, was now one himself. And he was right, we couldn't stop it, whatever it was, whatever force had taken hold of our lives, it was beyond our control. We were pawns in a game we didn't understand, helpless to change the course of our fate. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't sleep for many nights after that. I was too afraid. I was afraid of what was happening to my dad, afraid of what might happen to me, afraid of the growing darkness that was consuming our lives. I spent most of my time in a state of hypervigilance, my senses heightened, my every thought focused on survival. I watched my dad closely, looking for any sign of what he might do next, my heart pounding with every twitch, every blink, every piercing stare. The days became a blur of anxiety and dread. I went to school, sat through classes, interacted with my friends, but my mind was always elsewhere. I was never truly present, never fully engaged. The fear, the uncertainty, it was a constant weight on my soul, a dark cloud that followed me wherever I went. I felt like I was living in a horror movie, but instead of jump scares and gore, the terror was a slow, creeping dread that burrowed deep into my bones. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that the climax was coming. A horrifying confrontation that would change everything. Underscore, 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 underscore. One evening, my dad called me into the living room. Mom was sitting on the couch, her face pale and drawn. She had been struggling to recover from the pneumonia, her body racked by coughing fits that left her gasping for breath. She looked frail and vulnerable, like a fragile bird caught in a storm. My dad was standing by the fireplace, his back to me. The flames danced in his eyes, reflecting a bright, unnatural yellow that made my blood run cold. He turned slowly, and the sight of his face sent a wave of terror washing over me. The yellow in his eyes was blindingly bright now, burning with a fierce intensity. His third eye, that eerie slit in the middle of his forehead, pulsated with a sickly yellow light. And his grin, that horrible, grotesque grin. It stretched across his face like a gash, revealing rows of sharp, pointed teeth. He no longer resembled my dad, not even remotely. He was something else entirely. Something monstrous. Something inhuman. He spoke, and his voice, once warm and comforting, was now a raspy growl that sent shivers down my spine. "It's time," he said, his words dripping with malice. "The change is upon us." I didn't understand what he meant, but I understood the fear that choked my throat, that made my legs tremble, that sent my heart racing into overdrive. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that whatever was about to happen, it would be something terrible. Something life-altering. Something irreversible. He took a step toward my mom, and she cowered back against the couch, her eyes wide with terror. Her cough intensified, rattling in her chest, a desperate cry for help that went unanswered. "No," I screamed, my voice raw with fear. "Don't hurt her." He paused, his eyes burning into me, and for a moment, a flicker of something that might have been recognition, something that might have been sadness, crossed his face. But it was fleeting, a brief glimpse of humanity lost in a sea of darkness. "This is for your own good, Clay," he said, his voice a twisted parody of affection. "You'll understand, soon." He lunged toward my mom, his movements swift and jerky, like a puppet controlled by unseen strings. Mom screamed, a high-pitched wail of terror that echoed through the house. She tried to scramble away, but it was too late. My dad, or whatever he had become, pinned her against the couch, his sharp teeth glinting in the firelight. I watched, paralyzed by fear, as the monstrous thing that looked like my dad sank its teeth into my mom's throat. Blood spurted, staining the white couch crimson. Mom's screams turned to gurgled cries, her eyes rolling back in her head as her lifeblood drained away. The monster that had been my dad ripped away from Mom's throat, her body slumping lifeless on the couch. Blood dripped from its jaws, its yellow eyes burning with a savage hunger. It turned to me, its grotesque grin widening, and I knew, with a sickening certainty, that I was next. Underscore, 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 underscore. I ran. I don't remember how I got out of the house. I just remember the primal surge of adrenaline, the desperate urge to escape, to get as far away from the monster as possible. I didn't look back, didn't stop running, not until my lungs burned and my legs screamed for mercy. I ended up hiding in the woods behind our house, huddled at the base of a large oak tree, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The cool night air did little to ease the burning fear that coursed through my veins. I don't know how long I stayed there, hiding in the darkness. Hours, maybe days. Time seemed to lose all meaning, a blurry tapestry of fear and confusion. At some point, I heard sirens in the distance. The flashing lights of police cars painting the night sky in harsh reds and blues. I watched, my heart pounding, as officers swarmed our house, their movements cautious, their faces grim. I knew they were too late. Eventually, I couldn't fight the exhaustion anymore. Sleep claimed me, pulling me down into a dark, dreamless abyss. When I woke, it was to the harsh glare of the morning sun filtering through the trees. My body ached, my throat felt parched, and my mind reeled with the fragmented memories of the night before. I sat there for a long time, trying to make sense of what had happened, trying to reconcile the horrific images with the remnants of the life I had once known. I knew I couldn't go back home. Not ever. But where could I go? Who would believe me? Who would understand? I was utterly alone. Underscore, 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 underscore. I wandered the streets for days, living on scraps of food scavenged from trash cans, my clothes ragged, my hair matted, my body exhausted. I avoided contact with other people, my fear of discovery, of disbelief, too strong to overcome. I slept wherever I could find shelter under bridges, in abandoned buildings, in the shadowed recesses of public parks. The world had become a cold, hostile place, a labyrinth of shadows and whispers that seemed to mock my pain and isolation. I thought about going to the police, about telling them what I had seen, but I knew it was futile. They would never believe me. They would think I was crazy, a traumatized kid making up stories. And the thought of being locked away, labeled as insane, was unbearable. So I stayed hidden, a ghost haunting the fringes of society, my existence a secret shared only with the shadows. The monster that had been my dad, the creature that had murdered my mom, continued to haunt my thoughts. I saw his yellow eyes in every darkened doorway, heard his raspy voice in every whisper of the wind, felt his cold touch in the chill of the night. And I couldn't shake the feeling, the terrifying certainty, that he wasn't finished with me. That he was out there, somewhere, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. The fear was a constant companion, a gnawing hunger that never abated. It poisoned my thoughts, twisted my perceptions, warped my reality. The world around me seemed to shift and shimmer, the familiar becoming strange and unsettling. I felt like I was losing my grip on sanity, slipping into a madness from which there was no escape. And through it all, the question that haunted me, that echoed in the desolate chambers of my mind, was, what had become of me? What was I changing into? Underscore, 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 underscore. Months turned into years. I learned to survive on the streets, to blend into the shadows, to become invisible. The fear never left, but I learned to live with it, to wear it like a second skin. I moved from city to city, state to state, always on the move, always looking over my shoulder, always searching for a place to belong, a place where I could finally be safe. But there was no safety. Not for me, not anymore. The changes that had started after that fateful night continued to manifest, slowly at first, then with an alarming rapidity. I grew taller, my body becoming lean and wiry, my senses sharpened, becoming acutely attuned to the world around me. And the yellow, that eerie, unsettling yellow that had consumed my dad's eyes, it began to bloom in mine. I avoided looking in mirrors, terrified of what I might see. But I could feel it happening, an insidious transformation that I couldn't control. Sometimes, when I looked at my reflection in a shop window, or in the mirrored surface of a skyscraper, I would catch a glimpse of the monster I was becoming. A grotesque parody of my former self, with eyes that burned with an unnatural yellow light, and a cruel mockery of a smile that revealed rows of sharp, pointed teeth. And those brief, horrifying glimpses fueled the terror, the gnawing certainty that I was destined to follow in my dad's footsteps. That I was doomed to become the very monster that had destroyed my life. The nights were the worst. That's when the fear was most acute, most overwhelming. I would lie awake, my heart pounding, my mind racing with terrifying images and paranoid delusions. I imagined my dad, his yellow eyes burning bright, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to drag me back into the nightmare. I began to hear whispers in the darkness, whispers that echoed my name, whispers that promised power and knowledge, whispers that seduced me with their insidious allure. And sometimes, when the moon was full, I felt a strange pull, a deep yearning that drew me towards the shadows, a hunger that gnawed at my soul, urging me to embrace the darkness that beckoned from within. Underscore, 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 underscore. I don't know how much longer I can resist it. The transformation is almost complete. The yellow in my eyes burns brighter each day. The hunger grows stronger with each passing hour. The whispers in the darkness, they no longer promise, they command. They tell me that my destiny awaits. They tell me that it's time to embrace my true nature. They tell me that I am becoming the monster. And I know, deep in the marrow of my bones, that they are right. I am clay, and I am no longer human.